Hello, this is Dr. Rebecca Wood, and I would like to welcome you to the Week 3 lecture. This week we are going to discuss, among other things, truth, logic, and religion. Our first author was Plato, who grew up in an influential Greek family during the disastrous Peloponnesian War between the city-states of Athens and Sparta. Athens and Sparta were the two most powerful and populous city-states in what was ancient Greece, and Athens' defeat in that war led to the execution of Plato's mentor, the famous philosopher Socrates. And Plato spent the rest of his life writing about Socrates' teaching and his life. Apparently, Socrates left no written material behind, and Plato also developed his own ideas, including his belief that the most important thing in life was to discover the truth. Here's a couple fun facts about Plato I found in my research for this lecture. According to an article on the Encyclopedia Britannica website, and this is a direct quote in the exact format and the exact words of the source, including these bullet points. So Plato's real name was Aristocles. His pseudonym was derived from Platos, meaning broad, for his broad shoulders or forehead, and this is a bust of Plato's face, or at least as it was perceived by artists. Plato was a wrestler and competed in the Isthmian Games, an athletic event similar to the Olympics, so he was not only a philosopher and scholar, he also was an athlete. Plato spent a great deal of energy arguing against the sophists because he believed they cared only about persuading an audience of their point of view. I believe he also blamed them for Socrates' death because they argued for the war, they argued for whatever they wanted without necessarily worrying about the truth or about the common good of the people. Plato founded a school in Athens called the Academy, and this school attracted his most famous student, Aristotle. And one of Plato's most important works was his dialogue, Gorgias, which described a conversation between the noted sophist Gorgias and Socrates, his mentor. And then Aristotle was our second author this week, and Aristotle became the tutor or teacher for one of the great warlords of the past, who was called Alexander the Great. Before he became Alexander's tutor, he was one of Plato's best students. He didn't agree with Plato's view that all rhetoric, persuasive speaking and writing, was an inferior and dangerous counterfeit of philosophy. Note here, this is also a direct quote, so I am using direct quotes in this presentation as you might in your paper, and then documenting the source, which in this case is the editor of our textbook, and this is the page number this quote is found on. Aristotle believed that while rhetoric could be used for good or evil purposes, things that are true and things that are just have a natural tendency to prevail in most arguments, and that's Aristotle quoted in the Austin source. After Plato's death, Aristotle left Athens and became a private tutor to the young Alexander the Great. Aristotle's rhetoric and logic. Aristotle stated that rhetoric may be defined as the faculty of observing in any given case the available means of persuasion. So he believed that you could find almost any argument in anything. So he also discussed the importance of engaging the audience's emotions. So trying to get the audience to have certain feelings that would help them understand and agree with his argument. And what do you think about the idea? Is the truth more likely to win any argument, as Aristotle thought, or is that possibly a little too optimistic? And then our next author is Augustine, who wrote On Christian Doctrine, and he began his religious career as a bishop in Hippo, Algeria, by writing his life story in which he confessed to numerous adventures during his youth, when he abandoned his Christian faith. So he became a bishop after having kind of a wild period. And despite that wild and worldly phase and his detailed description of that phase in his Confessions, he became the greatest theologian of the early Christian church and was made a saint after his death. And this is actually kind of a random picture, but I thought it went well with the presentation and with the information about Augustine. And he talked a lot about rhetoric and religion. He believed that rhetoric could be used as a force for good and to bring people to the Christian faith. He asked why the faculty of eloquence would not be obtained for the uses of the good in the service of truth. So he believed that it was all right and actually a good thing to use rhetoric and persuasion to bring people to the church. And then we studied the writings of Wayne Booth and his rhetorical stance, and he was a modern philosopher and rhetorician who earned his PhD in English from the University of Chicago, where he worked for many years, and he developed the concept of the rhetorical stance, which he defined as mastery of the subject matter one is speaking about, an understanding of the audience one is addressing, and a concern with the voice and character of the communicator. And I really like his idea about the character of the communicator, that we should try to project and have an honest and credible character to go along with the message that we are presenting. And here's some points to consider as you write your paper 1. I would like you to think about, or already know, hopefully, what film you're basing your paper on. Which of our reading assignments are you relating to your film in the paper? And can you make an argument that your film illustrates the primary themes in your selection from our reading assignments? And here's an example I thought of. How does the humorous and irreverent treatment of the typically serious story of King Arthur in Monty Python and the Holy Grail relate to our usual sense of knowledge and history, such as in Seneca's On Liberal and Vocational Studies? You might kind of think about, well, how can, this really ridiculous movie have anything to do with history, which we often think of with a capital H, and it's serious stuff. But it's kind of interesting that one of the members of the Monty Python troupe, Terry Jones, held a PhD, and he wrote numerous books about medieval history and literature and was a respected scholar as well as quite humorous and irreverent. And so here I have a cover image from Amazon.com of just one of the books that he worked on, and you'll notice that it's a BBC book that was published, and so he has many books and lots of great ideas and interesting things to say about medieval history and literature. And so if you have time, you might want to investigate that. And here we are at the last page or slide of our presentation, and this is a references page. And so normally this would be in regular double-space type, and the references title should really be in regular text size, but when you're doing a presentation, it's always kind of hard to figure out where the presentation ends and your research documentation would begin. So we have our sources here. We have several pieces from our textbook, which I quoted or cited from the actual author, the original author here. But also we have information from our editor, so we have him on the references page separately. And then we have an article that I found about Plato, and it had that nice bust of his face from the Encyclopedia Britannica. And then I also wanted a nice image of Wayne Booth, and I found that in this article on the University of Chicago News Office website. So I do document as best I can, which I am hoping that you all will too on your papers. And I hope you have a wonderful week, and thank you very much.